In the heart of Crestwood, a neighborhood clinging to its weathered charm amid encroaching steel and glass, Isaac Bennett's small hardware store stood as a quiet defiance against the tide of progress. Bennett's Hardware wasn't just a business, it was a cornerstone, a place where locals found nails and advice in equal measure, where Isaac knew every face and every story behind it. But the developers of Crestwood Heights LLC had other plans. Their glossy vision of luxury condos and chain retailers left no room for the chipped paint and creaky floors of Isaac's shop. On a stifling July night, that vision took a fatal step forward when Isaac was gunned down in his store, the killing masked as a police operation gone wrong. The truth, however, lived on in the mind of his 10-year-old daughter, Clara Bennett, a girl with a memory so sharp it could cut through the lies that followed. Clara had her father's steady gaze and her mother's fierce heart, but her gift was uniquely her own, a flawless recall that captured every moment, every word, every shadow. That night, crouched behind the store's back counter, she saw the muzzle flash, heard the fabricated shouts, and watched Officer Nathan Caldwell plant a gun by her father's lifeless hand. The men who killed him thought they'd silenced the last witness. They were wrong. Months later, in a courtroom thick with tension, Clara's clear voice would pierce the silence, unraveling a conspiracy that reached from the precinct to the penthouses of Crestwood's elite. 6 months earlier, the Bennett family's life hummed with quiet routine. Morning light spilled into their kitchen as Isaac scrambled eggs at the stove, the sizzle blending with the gospel music drifting from a small radio. His wife, Rachel, sat at the table, her laptop open to a spreadsheet of eviction cases. A housing advocate with a law degree earned through night school, she spent her days fighting for Crestwood's tenants against the developer's relentless push. Clara perched nearby, her pencil scratching out multiplication tables, a game she played to make her father smile. 12 times 7, Isaac called over his shoulder, flipping an egg. 84, Clara shot back, not missing a beat. Faster than a calculator, he said with a grin, sliding a plate her way. You're gonna run this store someday, kid. Rachel looked up, her eyes warm but shadowed with fatigue. Or she'll run the world. Just don't forget us little people when you're famous. Their home sat above the store, a modest apartment filled with family photos and Clara's academic certificates. Isaac had inherited the hardware business from his father, turning it into a hub of community trust. He fixed broken locks for free, taught kids how to use tools, and kept prices low for neighbors stretched thin. Rachel battled in courtrooms and church basements, her voice a steady force against the eviction sweeping Crestwood. Clara, with her fifth-grade smarts and endless questions, was their pride, a bridge between their past and a future they fought to protect. But change was creeping in. Flyers arrived in the mail touting Crestwood reimagined, a new era. The images showed gleaming towers and upscale shops, Bennett's Hardware erased from the map. Isaac crumpled the paper and tossed it aside. They can dream all they want, he said, his tone resolute. This store's not for sale. The pressure began subtly. Realtors knocked with offers too low to consider. For sale signs sprouted on neighboring lots, and moving trucks rolled out with elderly residents who'd caved. A future site, Crestwood Plaza banner went up across the street, its promise of progress a slap to Isaac's legacy. He watched it all from his counter, his jaw tightening. This isn't just about us, he told Clara one evening, hammering a shelf back into place. It's about everyone who depends on this place. We don't bend. Clara nodded, her small hand steadying the wood. I'll remember, Dad. Trouble arrived on a crisp April afternoon. Officer Nathan Caldwell stepped into Bennett's Hardware, his boots echoing on the worn floor. He wore sunglasses despite the dim light, his presence drawing wary glances from customers browsing the aisles. Routine check, Caldwell said, his voice carrying. He ran a gloved finger along a shelf, frowning at the lack of dust. Heard some stores around here have inventory problems. Hate to see that happen to you, Bennett. Isaac kept his cool. Everything's in order, officer. Feel free to look. Caldwell lingered, flipping through the sales log with deliberate slowness. He asked about specific customers, Mr. Tate's paint order, Miss S. Ellis's weekly screws, his hand hovering near his gun. Before leaving, he paused. Nice setup. Be a pity if it got complicated. The store fell quiet after he left. Isaac's hands trembled slightly as he locked the door that night. "They're sniffing around," he told Rachel over dinner, his fork tapping the plate, "trying to spook us." She pushed her glasses up, her brow furrowed. "It's not random. I found a file today, 4 properties on Oak Lane, all hit with violations last month, all sold to Crestwood Heights LLC. They're targeting holdouts." Clara listened, her eyes flicking between them. Later, in her room, she sketched the store's layout in her notebook, noting Caldwell's position at 2:19 p.m. His badge number 583 etched in her mind. She didn't know why it mattered, but her father's voice rang clear. "Remember everything." Spring brought a steady escalation. Rachel faced traffic stops, 3 in a week, each one citing minor nonsense, like a flickering brake light. Clara timed them from the passenger seat, 22 minutes apiece, just long enough to disrupt her mother's schedule. Isaac dealt with surprise inspections, each one nitpicking, a shelf misaligned by an inch, a ledger not up to code, despite decades of compliance. Fines arrived in the mail, and suppliers grew evasive, their shipments delayed with mumbled apologies. One stormy evening, Clara watched from the car as Isaac was pulled over, forced to stand in the rain while officers searched his truck. Expired tag, they claimed, though Clara knew he'd renewed it. The family started a log, dates, times, badge numbers. Caldwell's name appeared too often. The threats turned overt. A rock shattered the store's window, ghost scratched into it. A fake eviction notice appeared, community upgrade imminent. Late night calls jolted them. Awake, the line silent but menacing. Clara found her backpack zippers cut at school, and Rachel's office got emails with photos of their home, Clara's recess schedule attached. Isaac installed cameras, taught Clara to spot tailing cars, and hid a recorder in the store's back room. Rachel set up an encrypted email system, rigged to send evidence to allies if untouched for 3 days. "They want a war," Isaac said, his voice firm. "We'll fight with facts." By June, Crestwood simmered with unrest. Church meetings buzzed with residents decrying the displacement, though fear muted many voices. Isaac spoke at one, his words cutting through the room. "This isn't progress, it's a purge. They're not lifting us up, they're pushing us out." Rachel passed out legal pamphlets, her eyes scanning for the plainclothes officers scribbling in the back. Clara collected comment cards, her sharp gaze catching Caldwell outside, snapping photos of parked cars. The next day, Miss S. Vera Holmes, a 79-year-old regular, leaned close as she paid for nails. "My nephew's in the city office. Says your name's on a list. Isaac. Watch yourself, they played dirty." That night, Isaac sat in the darkened store, staring at a faded photo of his father behind the counter. Rachel found him there at midnight, Clara trailing with a thermos. "We're not backing down," he said softly. "This is our stand." 2 nights later, Clara woke to a car idling outside at 2:03 a.m. Peeking through her blinds, she saw a sedan with dark windows, a camera lens glinting. With her dad's binoculars, she spotted a police radio inside. She jotted the plate 9P317 in her notebook, then crept to her parents' room. Isaac was already up, watching. "Back to bed, sweetheart," he whispered. "I see them." The tipping point hit on a humid July evening. Caldwell knocked during dinner, his cruiser glaring in the driveway. "Wellness check," he said, his smile cold. "Keeping our families safe." He noted details with eerie accuracy. Clara's science fair ribbon, Rachel's court dates on the fridge. "School starting soon, right? Early wake-ups for the little one." Isaac stood between him and Clara, his posture rigid. "We're good, officer. Thanks." Caldwell left his card. "Call anytime." After he left, Clara's breaths came fast, her voice shaking. "He's been at school, Dad, watching me at lunch." Isaac hugged her tight. "We're running out of time," he told Rachel later, his tone grave. "We need to act." That night, Isaac slipped out, telling Rachel he'd gotten a tip. Clara, stirred by the door's creak, followed in the shadows, her recorder watch on. In an empty lot, she hid behind a trash bin as Caldwell met 2 men, Paul Grayson, a developer with slick hair, and Councilman Edward Marsh. "Phase 2's in August," Grayson said, lighting a cigarette. "Bennett's the holdout." "He's the linchpin," Caldwell replied. "Take him out, the rest fall." Marsh frowned. "Violations didn't work?" He's too careful, Caldwell said. We need a clean break. Grayson exhaled smoke. Make it happen. That corner's mine by September. Clara's elbow nudged a can, the clink sharp. Caldwell turned, hand on his gun, but she bolted, racing home through alleys. Under her covers, she clutched the recorder, her pulse pounding. She had evidence now. The next day, suppliers cut Isaac off. Can't risk it, one muttered. Chain stores got extra stock, a sign they expected Bennett's to close. Then, at 2:41 p.m., Caldwell stormed in with 2 officers, waving a broad warrant. Illegal sales, he barked, shoving customers out. Isaac stayed calm. I want my lawyer. Later, Caldwell snapped, directing officers to plant evidence: a bottle, cash. Isaac protested, check my footage. An officer smashed the visible cameras. Through the back, Clara watched, recorder running. Isaac met her eyes, shaking his head. Stay put. Caldwell yelled, weapon. 2 shots cracked the air. Isaac crumpled, blood pooling, his phone in hand. Caldwell planted a gun, his voice steady. He drew first. Rachel arrived, screaming as officers held her back. Clara slipped in with her key, grabbed a hidden USB, and vanished into the crowd. Her last sight, her father's hand still reaching. Police swarmed, tape stretching wide. Caldwell spun a drug bust story backed by a prepped statement. News blared, store owner killed in raid. Mayor Hayes praised the force. Evidence vanished, footage was doctored, and Rachel's lawyer pleas were ignored. At Isaac's funeral, the church overflowed, but unmarked cars snapped photos. Clara stood by the casket, placing his store key atop it. I remember everything, she whispered. Caldwell drove by, staring a warning. For 25 days, Clara was silent, her walls covered in coded diagrams. Rachel fought alone, her pregnancy twins adding weight. Then, one night, Clara spoke to her grandmother, chopping onions. They're lying about Dad. I can prove it. The kitchen fell silent. The only sound, the soft hiss of onions sizzling in the pan. Clara's grandmother, Esther, turned slowly, her weathered hands pausing mid-stir. What do you mean, child? She asked, her voice slow but steady. Clara's eyes, red-rimmed but resolute, met hers. I was there, Grandma. I saw it all. Officer Caldwell shot Dad, and he wasn't holding a gun, just his phone. I recorded it. Esther set the spoon down, wiping her hands on her apron. You're sure about this? Clara nodded, pulling the watch from her wrist. She pressed a button, and the tinny sound of her father's voice filled the room. I'm reaching for my phone to call my lawyer. Then the sharp crack of gunfire, followed by Caldwell's calm. He drew first. Esther's face hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line. We need to tell your mother, she said, but Clara shook her head. Not yet. She's already breaking. I need more, something they can't ignore. Esther studied her granddaughter, seeing Isaac's stubborn fire in her small frame. You're 10 years old, Clara. This isn't your burden. It's mine now, Clara replied, her voice unwavering. Dad told me to remember everything. I'm going to. That night, Clara didn't sleep. She sat cross-legged on her bed, her notebook open, pages spilling with diagrams only. She could decode timelines of Caldwell's visits, license plates from the lot meeting, badge numbers from every stop. Her walls, once adorned with drawings of Crestwood's streets, now bore a map of connections, arrows linking officers to properties sold, dates of inspections to evictions. At the center, in bold red ink, was Nathan Caldwell, 583. Downstairs, Rachel paced, her phone pressed to her ear. Yes, I know the case is closed, but there's evidence, real evidence. Her voice cracked as she argued with a contact at the district attorney's office, her free hand resting on her swelling belly. The twins kicked, a reminder of the life she had to protect. She hung up, defeated, and sank into a chair, unaware Clara watched from the stairs. The next morning, a foreclosure notice arrived, 30 days to vacate, despite Rachel's payments. She found a second mortgage in Isaac's name, the signature a clumsy forgery. Her calls to the bank revealed it had been bought by a Crestwood Heights subsidiary. Water leaked into the basement from a street pipe no one else reported, and a city inspector deemed the house unsafe after an anonymous tip. Neighbors sold fast, their homes razed for prep work, isolating the Bennetts further. Clara saw it all, her silence a shield as she gathered more. She slipped into the store's ruins one dawn, now taped off and guarded by a single officer who dozed in his cruiser. Using a loose board Isaac had shown her, she retrieved a second USB from a floor compartment backup, evidence her father had hidden. Back home, she played it, grainy footage of Caldwell inspecting shelves. His voice low. Would be a shame if something happened. School became a battleground. Her teacher, Miss S. Larson, whose cousin worked in the precinct, accused Clara of cheating on a history test. Her perfect score impossible. Clara recited the textbook verbatim, but was sent to the principal instead of praised. Caldwell lingered outside at recess, his cruiser idling. She sketched his movements, her pencil trembling but precise. Rachel's allies dwindled. Friends avoided her, crossing streets when she approached. Anonymous groceries appeared on their porch, small acts of defiance from a scared community. Miss S. Vera Holmes brought soup daily, whispering, "They killed Isaac, and they'll starve you too if we let them." But most stayed silent, fear trumping loyalty. One evening, Rachel found Clara's room, gasping at the evidence wall. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Proof," Clara said simply, handing her the USBs. "Dad knew they'd come for him. He made sure we could fight back." Rachel listened to the recordings, tears streaming as Isaac's voice filled the space. She clutched Clara's hand. "We're taking this to someone who'll listen." They met Lena Harper, an investigative journalist, in a diner 2 towns over. Clara wore a hoodie, her watch recording as Lena scribbled notes. "David exposed precinct corruption 5 years ago," she said, eyeing the USBs. "Got threats for it. If this is what you say, it's bigger than Crestwood." Clara recounted the lot, meeting Grayson's cigarette, Marcia's frown, Caldwell's plan. Lena's pen paused. "You saw that? At 10? "I remember everything," Clara said, her tone flat but firm. Rachel added, "Isaac set up an email system. If he didn't log in weekly, it sent evidence to contacts. It triggered last month, friends got files, but they're too scared to act." Lena leaned back, her expression grim. "This could blow up, but they'll hit back hard. You ready for that?" "We have to be," Rachel said, her hand on Clara's shoulder. Lena's first article ran a week later, a cautious piece questioning the raid's timeline. Public records showed businesses closing before Crestwood Heights announcements, a pattern Clara's wall had predicted. Tips flooded in an anonymous paramedic, claiming Isaac was dead before help arrived, a supplier admitting police pressure to cut him off. Clara cataloged each one, her notebooks piling up. Caldwell retaliated fast. Rachel's car tires were slashed outside court. Clara found a tracker in her backpack, its red light blinking. Their home was vandalized liar in red paint across the garage. Rachel installed a security system, testing it nightly with Clara. They created a safe word hammer, Isaac's favorite tool for emergencies. One night, rookie officer Julia Mendez approached Rachel after a tenants meeting. Glancing over her shoulder, she slipped a note into Rachel's hand. "Caldwell's got a file system in the precinct basement off the books. They call it Clean Sweep. Your family's top of the list." She vanished before Rachel could respond. Clara overheard, adding Clean Sweep to her map. The next day, a brick crashed through their window with a note, "Drop it or else." Rachel called Lena, who traced Mendez's note to a leaked memo officers targeting businesses with harassment, timed to development phases. Clara's recording from the lot matched names in the memo: Grayson, Marsh, Caldwell. Rachel confronted District Attorney Marcus Tate at his office, Clara's evidence in hand. "This is murder and corruption," she said, slamming the USBs down. "My daughter saw it." Tate, a wiry man with tired eyes, sighed. "The case is closed, Rachel. I'd need a mountain to reopen it." "Then climb it," she snapped, playing the lot recording. Tate's face shifted skepticism to unease. "Where'd you get this?" "Clara," Rachel said. "She's 10, and she's braver than your whole office." Tate hesitated. "The precinct's got pull. Judge Reed's in their pocket. But I'll look." Quietly, 3 weeks later, a grand jury convened in secret. Clara and Rachel entered through a back door, media barred. Clara wore her father's old key on a chain, her watch hidden under her sleeve. The jurors, teachers, clerks, Retirees shifted uncomfortably as she took the stand, her small frame dwarfed by the box. Tate kept it tight, 12 questions, each answered with chilling clarity. "What did you see on July 17th at 2:41 p.m.?" he asked. "Officer Caldwell shot my dad," Clara said, her voice steady. He was holding his phone. Then Caldwell put a gun by his hand and said, "He drew first." Jurors scribbled, one wiping tears. Deliberation took 2 hours, an indictment for second-degree murder and evidence tampering. Caldwell's arrest aired live. His face, pale as cuffs, snapped on. The trial began in October, a circus of power and intimidation. Caldwell's defense, led by Ellen Voss, a former DA with a perfect record, hired 6 lawyers and a PR firm. The police union raised $600,000. Ads calling Caldwell a hero wronged. Judge Arthur Reed, a precinct ally, packed the gallery with uniformed officers, their stares a silent threat. Voss painted Isaac as a crook, Clara as coached. "A desperate man running an illegal racket," she told the jury, flashing doctored ledgers. "His daughter's a pawn in her mother's vendetta." Reed blocked Clara's lot recording chain of custody issues and barred harassment testimony as irrelevant. Witnesses crumbled. A supplier recanted after a tax audit. Mrs. Holmes wavered, her nephew threatened. Rachel took the stand, her composure cracking as Voss played raid footage Isaac's body, blood pooling. "Why didn't you stop him?" Voss pressed. Rachel snapped. "They hunted him." Reed struck it, warning her off. Clara watched, her pencil flying. She whispered to Tate during a recess, "They're lying about the gun. Dad's hand was open, I saw it." Tate's last card was Clara. Voss fought to exclude her, citing age, but Reed relented. Her grand jury testimony had weight. The courtroom hushed as Clara swore in, her hand steady on the Bible. Tate started soft. "Clara, how old are you?" 10 years, 8 months, she said, clear and precise. "What grade?" "5th, at Crestwood Elementary. I take 6th grade science." Jurors leaned in. Tate built to it. "Is the person who shot your father here?" Clara's arm rose, slow but sure, pointing at Caldwell. "He killed my dad. He was holding his phone, not a gun." Gasps rippled. Caldwell shifted, his tie askew. "Objection," Voss barked. "Speculation." "Overruled," Reed said, his tone reluctant. "She's an eyewitness." Clara detailed the raid. 2:41 p.m. 2 shots, Caldwell's ankle holster. Then Tate asked, "Anything special that day?" "My watch," Clara said, pulling it out. "Dad said to record important things." Voss leapt up. "Not disclosed." "We gave it yesterday," Tate countered. After a tense sidebar, Reed allowed it, his jaw tight. The audio played. Isaac's voice, the shots, Caldwell's lie. Jurors froze, one covering her mouth. Voss claimed tampering, but Clara's recall dates, times, details matched perfectly. Cross-examination turned brutal. Voss twisted timelines, but Clara corrected her. No, it was June 12th, 3:07 p.m., not June 14th. Caldwell wore a blue tie. Jurors smirked. Caldwell scribbled notes, his cool cracking. Then Clara turned it. "Why'd you tell the others to wait outside if it was a surprise raid?" she asked Caldwell directly, her voice cutting. He slammed the table, shouting, "Because your dad was a threat we had to end." The room erupted, jurors recoiling. Bailiffs restrained him, Reed banging his gavel. The tide turned. Officer Mendez cut a deal, exposing clean sweep, a precinct hit list. Files were seized, linking Caldwell to Grayson and Marsh. Reed recused himself after leaked calls to Voss surfaced. Judge Nora Kim, a no-nonsense reformer, took over, adding conspiracy charges. Caldwell got 35 years, no parole. Grayson and Marsh faced racketeering. The police chief resigned amid indictments. Crestwood Heights stalled, its assets frozen. A year later, Bennett's Hardware reopened as the Isaac Bennett Justice Hub, a co-op store, legal clinic, and community space. Clara, now 11, stood at the ribbon cutting, her father's key in hand. "Remembering's not enough," she told the crowd. "We have to act." Rachel, with twins, Jonah and Hope at her side, ran the clinic, her work sparking a national push against enforcement-driven displacement. Clara's wall now held news clippings similar cases she tracked, her mind still sharp. On the verdict's anniversary, she visited Isaac's grave, the key atop it. "We remembered Dad, and we changed it." Flowers bloomed around her, planted by neighbors who'd fought back. Crestwood stood, reshaped not by greed, but by its people. The Isaac Bennett Justice Hub buzzed with life on its opening day, its fresh paint gleaming under the late summer sun. Clara stood beside her mother, Rachel, as the crowd cheered neighbors, former customers, and new faces drawn by the story that had rippled beyond Crestwood. The twins, Jonah and Hope, toddled near Rachel's feet, their dark curls bouncing as they gripped Clara's hands. At 11, Clara had grown an inch taller, her frame still slight, but her presence commanding. She clutched her father's store key, its weight a quiet anchor as she spoke to the gathered crowd. "Dad said, 'Remembering is the first step,'" she said, her voice carrying over the hum of voices. "But it's what we do with it that matters. This place isn't just a building, it's us fighting back." Applause erupted, and Clara stepped back, her eyes scanning the faces. Mrs. Vera Holmes nodding proudly, Lena Harper snapping photos, even Officer Julia Mendez, now in plain clothes, offering a small salute. Rachel took the podium next, her twins perched on her hips. "Isaac believed in this community," she said, her tone steady despite the catch in her throat. "He gave everything to protect it. Now we're building something he'd be proud of, a place where no one gets pushed out." Her gaze lingered on the co-op store's shelves, stocked by local hands, and the legal clinic's open door, already busy with tenants seeking help. The ribbon fell, and Crestwood exhaled a collective breath held too long. But for Clara and Rachel, the fight was far from over. The hub was a victory, but the scars of their battle ran deep, and the forces they'd challenged weren't gone, they'd only retreated. In the months that followed, Crestwood began to heal, reshaped by its own resilience. The Justice Hub became a beacon, its co-op employing locals who'd lost jobs to chain stores, its clinic winning stays against evictions. Rachel's caseload grew, her desk piled with files from tenants across the county facing the same tactics. Crestwood had endured. She hired 2 young lawyers, former law school classmates, who'd followed her story and trained them in the cramped office above the store, her twins napping in a crib nearby. Clara returned to school, her silence replaced by a quiet confidence. Her classmates, once distant under their parents' fear, now crowded her at lunch, asking about the trial. She started a justice club, its first meeting drawing 6 kids to discuss Crestwood's history and their rights. "We're not too young to care," she told them, passing out flyers she'd designed herself. Her grades stayed top-notch, though her notebooks still brimmed with observations, license plates of unfamiliar cars, snippets of overheard talks at the hub. The community rallied in fits and starts. Justice for Isaac signs reappeared in windows, this time staying up. Miss S. Holmes led truth walks, guiding residents through streets marked by displacement, sharing stories of resistance. A memorial garden bloomed where Isaac fell, its flowers tended daily by neighbors who'd once stayed silent. The hub hosted workshops, home repair from the co-op, legal rights from Rachel, drawing crowds eager to reclaim their stake in Crestwood. But the shadow lingered. Crestwood Heights LLC rebranded as New Horizons, their plans delayed but not dead. Anonymous calls resumed, now targeting the hub's staff. Rachel found a slashed tire on her car after a late-night case prep, and Clara spotted a drone hovering over the garden, its camera glinting. She sketched its shape in her notebook, her pencil steady. "We beat them once," Rachel told Clara over dinner, her voice firm. "They'll try again, but we're ready." Clara nodded, her watch still recording resting on her wrist. "Dad's evidence is safe. I hid copies in 3 places." She didn't elaborate, but Rachel trusted her daughter's meticulous mind. A year after the verdict, Rachel was invited to a Department of Justice symposium in Washington. Clara went too, her Justice Club notes tucked in her bag. Rachel testified before a panel, her voice echoing in the marble hall. Crestwood wasn't an accident, it's a playbook. Police power, tied to development money, displacing communities of color nationwide. "We stopped it once, but it's still out there. She cited Clara's wall, now digitized into a database showing patterns in 5 states: harassment spikes, business closures, property grabs. Clara sat in the gallery, her watch recording as lawmakers scribbled notes. A DOJ official approached afterward. "Your data's compelling," he said. "We're launching a task force. Want in?" Rachel agreed, her clinic becoming a pilot site for tracking enforcement-driven gentrification. Back home, Clara's story spread. Letters arrived from towns like Crestwood families, facing the same fight, asking for advice. She answered each one, her handwriting neat, enclosing flyers for the hub. "Start small," she wrote. "Remember everything they do, then act." Her bedroom walls shifted, news clippings replaced evidence, headlines from Ohio, Texas, Georgia mirroring Crestwood's struggle. She connected them, her mind tracing a web of corruption she vowed to unravel. The hub grew too. A second location opened on Oak Lane, funded by a settlement from the city, a precedent. Rachel's legal work had set. National civil rights groups took notice, forming a coalition based on her research. Law schools invited her to lecture, and she brought Clara once, who sat quietly in the back, her watch blinking red. "She's the real hero," Rachel told the students, smiling as Clara blushed. 2 years post-trial, Clara turned 12, her frame stretching taller, her eyes still sharp with purpose. Middle school brought new challenges. Bullies mocked her cop-hating family, but she faced them down, reciting their taunts back until they backed off. Her Justice Club swelled to 20 members, its projects winning local awards, a petition saving a park, a fundraiser for displaced tenants. Teachers called her a leader, though she shrugged it off. "I just do what Dad would have." Rachel's twins, now 3, ran the hub's halls, calling Clara Sissy. Jonah loved tools, hammering scraps with co-op workers. Hope shadowed Rachel, mimicking her courtroom arguments. The family moved to a new house, smaller, but theirs, after the old one sold to fund the hub. Clara's room stayed a command center, her walls a living archive of Crestwood's fight and beyond. One spring evening, the hub hosted a community forum. Over 200 attended, spilling into the street. Rachel spoke first, updating on a federal probe into New Horizons subpoenas issued, assets seized. Then Clara took the mic, her voice clear. "Dad's store was small, but it held us together. They thought they could erase it, erase us. We proved them wrong, but it's not over. Other places need us now." A man in the back stood, Mr. Tate, a former customer. "Isaac gave me nails when I couldn't pay. This hub's his spirit. Let's keep it alive." Donations poured in, enough to send aid to a struggling town in Kentucky facing Crestwood's old playbook. On the 3rd anniversary of Isaac's death, Clara visited his grave alone. The headstone read, "Isaac Bennett, husband, father, keeper of Crestwood." She placed his key atop it, beside a fresh daisy from the garden. "We remembered Dad," she whispered, "and we're still fighting." The memorial bloomed around her, a riot of color tended by hands that had once wavered. Across the street, the hub glowed, its sign a promise, "Built by us, for us." Clara turned, her watch ticking softly. She didn't mean just the device. Her memory, once a child's trick, was now a tool of justice, recording every step of their victory and the battles ahead. Crestwood stood transformed not by developers' greed, but by its people's grit. New Horizons faded, its towers unbuilt, replaced by affordable homes and local shops. The police, under new oversight, patrolled with less menace. A community board holding them accountable. Rachel's work sparked reforms, laws tightening enforcement abuses, funds redirecting to neighborhoods like hers. Clara walked home, neighbors waving from porches. Kids ran past, one shouting, "You're the girl who beat the cops." She smiled faintly, her mind already on Kentucky's letters. At home, she added their story to her wall, her pencil tracing a new arrow. "Justice starts with one voice," she wrote in her notebook, echoing Isaac's lesson. "Ours isn't the only one anymore." Clara closed her notebook, the soft scratch of her pencil fading into the stillness of her room. The walls around her pulsed with life clippings, maps, and letters woven into a tapestry of struggle and triumph, each thread a testament to Crestwood's refusal to break. She stood, her shadow stretching across the floor, and slipped her father's watch from her wrist. Its red light blinked one last time before she set it beside Isaac's key on her desk, a silent handover from tool to relic. She was 12 now, no longer just the girl who remembered, but the one who acted, who turned memory into a force that reshaped the world around her. Outside, dusk settled over Crestwood, painting the streets in hues of gold and gray. Clara stepped onto the porch, the air thick with the scent of the Memorial Gardens blooms drifting from the hub. She walked there alone, her steps steady against the uneven pavement, passing homes where lights flickered on families who'd stayed, who'd fought, who'd won. The garden greeted her with its quiet riot of color, petals swaying in the evening breeze, each one planted by hands that had once trembled, but now held firm. At its center stood Isaac's marker, simple and unyielding. Isaac Bennett, husband, father, keeper of Crestwood. She knelt, tracing the engraved words with her fingertips, the cool stone grounding her. "We did it, Dad," she whispered, her voice soft but sure. "You said the truth has power if someone's brave enough to tell it. I am. And it's not just me anymore." She placed a single daisy beside the key she'd left years ago, its petals bright against the fading light. Crestwood's ours now, not theirs. Rising, she turned to the hub across the street, its windows aglow with the hum of evening. Classes, kids learning carpentry, adults filing claims with Rachel's team. Jonah and Hope's laughter spilled from the co-op as they chased each other with wooden hammers. Rachel's silhouette framed in the doorway, watching over them. The building wasn't just a legacy, it was a living promise, a fortress built from the ashes of Isaac's store, its roots sinking deep into the soil of a community that refused to be erased. Clara's gaze lifted beyond Crestwood, to the horizon where other towns waited: Kentucky, Ohio, places where her letters had landed like sparks on dry grass. She'd sent them seeds of resistance, and they were growing, their voices rising in echoes of her own. Isaac's death had been a wound, but from it had sprung a movement, a ripple that stretched far beyond one neighborhood, one family, one child's perfect memory. It wasn't vengeance that drove her now, nor even grief, it was purpose, forged in the fire of loss and tempered by the strength she'd found within herself. She thought of her father's hands, steady as they fixed a lock or handed a tool to a neighbor in need. Those hands were gone, but their work lived on in the hub, in Rachel's fight, in Jonah and Hope's fearless joy, in every nail hammered and every case won, and in Clara, most of all. She carried his lessons not as a burden, but as a light, a beacon to guide others through their own shadows. As night fell, stars pierced the sky, sharp and unyielding. Clara stepped back, her breath misting in the cool air. "You told me to remember everything," she said, her voice a vow to the silence. "I did, but I'm doing more. I'm making sure no one forgets." She turned toward home, the hub's glow at her back, its warmth a quiet assurance that the fight wasn't over, only evolving. Crestwood stood, as it always had, not perfect, not untouched, but alive, its pulse beating in the people who'd claimed it as their own. Isaac's truth had been a spark, Clara's voice the flame, and together they'd lit a fire that no amount of power could smother. Justice, she understood now, wasn't a single victory or a final gavel's fall. It was a choice, made again and again by those brave enough to stand when others knelt. And as long as she breathed, that choice would never fade.